Howdy everyone, I'm going to get straight into this one. Today I'll be reviewing the Sigma 24-105mm f4 art lens and doing my best to compare it to its older doppelganger, the venerable Canon 24-105mm f4L lens. Both lenses are designed to work with full-frame cameras as well as aps-c. The Sigma lens costs around £570 or $800 at the moment, whereas the Canon lens can be found in a white box for as little as £450 or about $650 if you know where to look. So the copycat Sigma lens is generally a bit more expensive. It's also not really an easy lens to get hold of, as Sigma recently had some production issues with this particular lens. Namely, they wanted to manufacture some other lenses instead for a while. Well, in a moment we'll see how the Sigma and Canon lenses compare. If they're about the same, then any Nikon or Sony camera owners who have ever coveted the Canon 24-105mm lens might be made extremely happy. 24-105mm is an excellent zoom range on a full-frame camera, going from a very wide angle to short telephoto, good enough for portrait pictures. On an aps-c camera, that's still a good zoom range, but by starting at 24mm, you're zooming out on the widest angles here, so it really is a bit of a better lens for full-frame cameras. The lens's constant maximum aperture of f4 is good for this kind of zoom range. f4 becomes particularly useful as you zoom in, giving you more out-of-focus backgrounds and decent shutter speeds. Having a constant maximum aperture is also a nice feature for video makers. You don't lose any light as you zoom in and out. Combined with the lens's image stabilization, this could be an excellent video making lens. I know my Canon 24-105mm f4 lens certainly is. Let's take a look at the build quality of this Sigma lens. As you can see, it's a little bigger than its Canon counterpart, especially when you're zoomed in. It also weighs 200 grams, or nearly half a pound, heavier than the Canon lens. This really is rather a hefty piece of kit. The Sigma lens has a large filter thread of 82mm, whereas the Canon only needs 77mm filters, a little less expensive. On the upside, the Sigma does actually feel more solid and slightly nicer made than Canon's L lens, and not many lenses out there can boast of that. The lens's zoom ring turns extremely smoothly, evenly, and quite heavily. Stills photographers may prefer the slightly looser, lighter zoom ring on Canon's lens, but Sigma's heavy zoom ring is actually a major advantage for video makers who want to get some smooth and precise zooming action. The lens's focus ring is also very smooth and just about precise enough. The lens has full-time manual focusing, so you can turn that focus ring at any time. Both the zoom and focus rings turn the same way as Canon's lenses, so that saves a little confusion for Canon users. Both lenses have ultrasonic autofocus motors, which are quite accurate. Here's the Canon lens, and here's the Sigma. It's a very similar performance, but I think the Canon lens is a touch faster and the Sigma lens is a touch quieter. Both lenses have image stabilization, so let's look at the two systems. Here's some footage from the Canon lens without stabilization, and now with the stabilization turned on. The first thing you notice is that the older Canon lens's stabilization is pretty noisy. Any microphone attached to the camera will pick up that whirring noise easily, even a Rode video mic. The stabilization is quite smooth as you pan and tilt the lens around, though. Here's the same test on the Sigma lens. Let's turn its stabilization on. Silence. Fantastic. I think the Sigma lens's stabilization is actually a bit jerkier than the Canon lens though, when you try and hold the image still. So the Canon is a better lens if you're shooting with a microphone away from your camera, and the Sigma is much better if you need silence. Generally, both lenses have fantastic build quality, but the Sigma lens is preferable for video work due to its heavier zoom ring and quiet stabilization. The Canon lens is a bit lighter and quicker to handle, so stills photographers will probably prefer the Canon. Okay, image quality. I tested both these lenses extensively, making sure that they were both focused completely accurately, but I don't want to bog you down in endless details because, frankly, in terms of sharpness and chromatic aberration, both lenses really are almost the same. Both lenses are decently sharp at f4 throughout their zoom ranges and very sharp from f5.6 on both full frame and APS-C cameras. Sometimes the Sigma lens is just a touch sharper than the Canon, and sometimes it's the other way around. For example, here we have images shot at 24mm and f4. It seems here that the Sigma has a very tiny advantage in resolution over the Canon lens. The Sigma lens has a slightly more red cast to it too. Over in the corners, sharpness is virtually the same, and so are the levels of chromatic aberration visible there in the windows. However, at 105mm, it seems that the Canon lens has a tiny advantage in sharpness over the Sigma lens, from the middle of the image and over into the corners. And again, we're looking at the same levels of chromatic aberration. Admittedly, I slightly prefer the colours of the Sigma lens. The slightly red cast looks a bit more exciting to me. I found it to be the same situation on an APS-C camera. The Sigma seemed a touch sharper at the wide-angle end, and the Canon a touch sharper at 105mm. Honestly though, in terms of resolution, both lenses are like Tweedledum and Tweedledee. The differences are so very slight that I'm inclined to mostly put them down to sample variation or focusing errors. There's honestly no practical difference. And frankly, it's about the same situation with distortion and vignetting. My tests just aren't scientific enough to pick up any real differences here. Both lenses show strong barrel distortion at 24mm, which straightens out at about 30mm, turning into pincushion distortion at 105mm. Both lenses also have rather strong vignetting in the corners at f4, which is reduced when you stop down to f5.6. So it's the typical performance of a zoom lens here. When it comes to close focusing, both lenses can focus down to about 45cm. At f4, the Canon lens seems to be a little sharper than the Sigma when it comes to close-up image quality. However, at f5.6, it becomes a level playing field again, really. If anything, the Sigma lens now seems to deliver a little more contrast than the Canon. Interesting. Let's see about work against bright lights. In this test, we can see that both lenses show freckles of flaring and a big flare in the opposite side of the picture. However, the Sigma lens holds on to more contrast than the Canon, and the Canon lens throws up some big red rings for us to admire. So I think the Sigma lens is a clear winner here. Finally, bokeh. Both lenses render out-of-focus backgrounds quite smoothly without any highlighting or distractions. But I think the Sigma lens's backgrounds are noticeably smoother than Canon's. There really isn't much in it though. At the end of the day, these are both extremely practical, fun camera lenses which particularly lend themselves to video making. Choosing between them is tricky. Optically, they're virtually the same, although personally I prefer the color cast and the bokeh of the Sigma lens. I also think that video makers will prefer the Sigma lens's build quality. It has quieter electronics, and that zoom ring is heavy, smooth and well damped, turning more evenly than the Canon lens. But actually, I think that most people will prefer the Canon lens. It's less expensive, easier to get hold of, a little more compact, lighter, and quicker to handle than the bulky Sigma lens. It's up to you which instrument will better suit your needs, but as a rule of thumb, stills photographers should go for the Canon lens, and video makers should consider the Sigma. Have fun making up your minds, and God bless.